In our last study, you went home with at least 3 practical applications. First, we learned from Daniel's counsel that the more people we can convince to pray with us, the more possibility of change of things to occur. Gleason comments that Daniel also realized that the effectiveness of prayer may be heightened when believers unite in common supplication. So Daniel gathered his 3 companions in a concert of prayer that they might plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery of the king's dream. Secondly, the other general application which you brought home with you is one of God's attributes, and that is His might or power. This illustrates His complete control over the events of history, particularly in bringing about the reversals of fortune that give history its unpredictability. What did the king say? That if they could not show him his dream and interpret it, heads would roll. But we see here a reversal of that, and that is because of God's might, God's power. He has complete control over the events of history. God changes the times, that is, the course of history, and seasons, that is, the length or duration of an event. In other words, God determines when in history events are to take place and how long each process or phase in history is to endure. Now think about that, because that is an amazing thought, amazing fact, amazing truth that we find in the book of Daniel. And even throughout the entire Scripture, you'll find this over and over and over again. Thirdly, you brought home with you this application that Daniel turned to another divine attribute, and that is God's wisdom. Whatever wisdom the wise men of this world have attained has come from God, whether or not they recognize this. Humans are prone to swell with pride over their growing understanding of nature and its laws, when only by God's gifts do they achieve anything. Moreover, even the cleverest minds will never understand certain areas of mystery and foreknowledge. For they are, as the Apostle Paul said, they are spiritually discerned. And this brings us to Daniel chapter 2, verses 24 through 30 this evening. Daniel 2, 24 through, I think we're going to read all the way to 35, okay? Daniel 2, 24. Therefore Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, Destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. The interpretation. On your outline, look at, we observed, number 1, Daniel's confidence. Can you hear Daniel saying that? Can you hear his confidence? Arioch, destroy not the wise men, but bring me in before the king, and I will show him the interpretation. The voice of confidence. That is a far cry from the deceitful so-called counselors. Do you remember what they said? The wise men and the astrologers and the soothsayers and the magicians. By the way, does everybody have an outline here tonight? If you don't have one, please raise your hand. We can help you with that. All right, excellent. Everybody's got one. Does everybody have a pen? Pencil, marker, Crayola. Okay, everybody's got that. All right, excellent. And our children are paying attention real nice. Hello, I can see you, children. All right, pay attention to the preacher, okay? Excellent. We practiced that last night, right? We practiced that last night, so let's do that. Okay, excellent. Number 1, Daniel's confidence. Do you remember what the wise men said? They said, "O king, no one can do what you ask. No one can do what you ask. There is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter," but there was. And that was Daniel, a man, listen to this, whose confidence resided in God. By the way, I think one of the reasons why Daniel was so confident, listen to this. One of the reasons for Daniel's confidence is because he lived such an exemplary life in the midst of a tumultuous environment. You and I can have confidence in our life, a confidence that resides in God when we ourselves live godly lives. Listen to this quote by John G. Butler. And this will serve as a general application for all of us tonight. And there's some spaces there on your outline that I trust you would use to write some general applications for you to bring home tonight. Listen to this. Daniel, unlike many professing Christians, lived such an exemplary life that one could trust him. Oh, this one gets to the heart. Listen, too many Christians are not trustworthy. They do not pay their bills on time, they do not keep their word, and they cannot be counted on to tell the truth about matters. If Christians simply acted with character, the world would put more confidence in the message of Christianity. End quote. Wow. Verse 25 is one of the funniest things you'll ever observe. Whenever people are placed in desperate situations. Look at that. And Arioch, or then Arioch, brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah, O king, that will make known unto the king the interpretation. We'll call that number 2, Arioch's conniving. Girls, that's spelled C-O-N-N-I-V-I-N-G. You got it? C-O-N-N-I-V-I-N-G. Arioch's conniving. Do you realize what Arioch was doing here? Conniving little guy. John Phillips writes this, the captain tried to feather his own nest by claiming to be the one who had found a man of the captives of Judah who would make known unto the king the interpretation of his dream. Other commentators are not so forgiving. They say Arioch's claim is not the truth, but it is the characteristic of politicians that they desire to ingratiate, that is, to bring themselves to the king's favor by flattery. To bring themselves with their sovereign. What a difference here in the conduct of Daniel and Arioch. Arioch was quick to take credit for an achievement that was suspect, supposedly finding Daniel, while Daniel would not take credit for his superior achievements, but emphasized that God was the reason for the capability to reveal and interpret the dream. Arioch was a proud, conniving man, but Daniel was a humble man. Arioch was looking for favors from the king. Daniel was not looking for that at all. Number 3, we see the king's confirmation. In verse number 26, look at that. The king's confirmation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? So he's confirming this from Daniel. And so, of course, the king asked him, Really, Daniel, you're able to show me my dream and its interpretation? Didn't your colleagues, when they were polled and surveyed, when we asked them questions and when we surveyed them, didn't they all agree that no man could do this? I mean, public opinion of this matter, Daniel, is very weighty, isn't it? Public opinion says that you can't do this, but you can do this. He's confirming it with Daniel. Against all the elite experts' opinions. Does that sound familiar in our day-to-day? Going against expert opinions, men's opinions. I can't wait to see if you can, Daniel. But Daniel was able to do that. Look at in our outline verses 27 through 28. Number 4, we observe something remarkable here in Daniel's confession. Daniel's confession, verses 27 and 28. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. In other words, I'm agreeing with you, king, that yes, that's what my colleagues did say. Yes, that's what the opinion of the public did say. That is the expert opinion of my colleagues. Yes, I agree with you. But look at verse number 28. There is a God in heaven that reveals secrets and makes known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these, ... And we'll continue that in just a moment here. What did Daniel confess to? What did Daniel agree with the king? Yes, O king, I confess to you that what you demanded, no wise men, nor the astrologers, nor the magicians, nor the soothsayers can supply what you demanded, but God can do that. This brings us to verses 29 and 30. Number 5 on our outline. Daniel's comprehension. Daniel's comprehension. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. So we see here, this is an amazing thing. Daniel gave the king, and by extension, to us now in the 21st century audience, a comprehensive view of world history. what should come to pass hereafter to Daniel and the king and to their contemporaries at that time, it was yet future. But to us, this is now already written history. This is now documented history. This is now filed away as world history. And again, Daniel's comprehension of things to come was not his own doing, but this was the doing of one who reveals secrets, one who makes known to Daniel and the things that should come to pass. This is a remarkable truth. By the way, Jesus Christ refers to this in Luke 24, that this is the times of the Gentiles. Why is that? Well, because if you look at Genesis all the way to this point, up to this point, all you have really is the history of Israel. But now we are given, or Daniel gave it to King Nebuchadnezzar and their contemporaries there, the history of the Gentile world. That is, any non-Jew, their world. And so, I want to make a note here that everything that happened thus far, up to this point, up to this juncture of events, if you noticed it, that God always had a purpose for everything. God always has a purpose for everything. Look closely in verse number 30. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have, more than any living. What was the purpose of this? The purpose of God for this is for their sakes. Now, what in the world does that mean? Who's the there? Nebuchadnezzar? How about the wise men, the soothsayers and the astrologers, and for the magicians? God had a purpose for revealing this to Daniel, to be able to reveal it back to the king and interpret it to the king so that God could spare the others, so that their execution would be reversed. Do you see the merciful God? Do you see the one who would give opportunity after opportunity so that they would repent of their sins and believe the God of Daniel? Can you see that? God always had a purpose for everything. And I tell you right now, He has a purpose for everything that happens. We might not know it. We might be confused. But it is a scriptural truth that God has a purpose for everything. Right? Ecclesiastes says that, doesn't he? Ecclesiastes, he's got a purpose for everything under heaven. All right? Now, by the way, the King James translators supplied this word here, there. A word here that is not in the original. That's why we have it in the italic forms. And I'm talking about verse number 30, where it says, "But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sake." That word there is not in the original, and that's why you have it here as an italic form. Because the King James Version wanted to clarify what Daniel was referring to, what the author of Daniel was referring to. And they meant to refer to the contemporaries, the wise men, the soothsayers, and the astrologers, that God had a purpose for them. God wanted to show them mercy. Other translations, however, they think that should be your. That should be in reference to King Nebuchadnezzar. And that's fine because, yes, God did have a purpose for Nebuchadnezzar. You understand the purpose for Nebuchadnezzar? He was a wicked king, wasn't he? You know what his purpose was? God said it in Jeremiah. He said, I'm raising up this king, my servant Nebuchadnezzar. To what? To spank his own children. And as we continue to study Daniel here, because of Nebuchadnezzar's wickedness and apparent repentance, you see too that God had a specific purpose for him. Wow, this is amazing. This is remarkable and really to be expected of a God who is in control of everything. Oh, do you expect it from God? How big is your God? Is your God the God of Daniel? This is an amazing God. This is a humongous God. This is an awesome God. The one who can show the future because he himself had determined it himself from the foundations of the world and bring it to pass with all the wickedness and the evil that he has nothing to do with. God is not the author nor the originator of wicked or evil. And how did this happen? You have got to be a really big supreme being to pull this off. That's the amazing God whom we serve. This is a big God. This is a big God. The supreme being who knows everything and all powerful and all present. And get this, and we don't want to forget this, he is all loving too. He is all loving. And get this, he's not someone who works out of a whim. He's not an arbitrary God. Why? Because he always has a purpose for everything. He has a purpose for everything. Wow, this is a big God. And this is a God who deserves my worship. You ought to write that down as a general application. This big God deserves my worship. This supreme being deserves my allegiance. This big God deserves my obedience. And then, finally tonight, we come to number 6 on our outline, the Colossus. That's spelled C-O-L-O-S-S-U-S. Did you get that, girls? C-O-L-O-S-S-U-S. Colossus. What does it mean? The colossal image. The big image. This is simply the great image that is the dream of the king in verse 31 through 35. Now here it is. Thou, O king, Daniel confidently told the king what the king dreamt a couple of nights before. Verse 31, King, you saw and behold a great image, the Colossus, this great image whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. That's awesome. This is a bright, metallic image that was awesome, huge, colossal. Verse 32, the image head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, filled the whole earth. What do we observe here? What do we observe in this dream? Well, you have 5 kinds of elements being mentioned: gold, silver, brass, iron, and iron with clay. This metallic image is top heavy and very weak at the base. Why do you say that, Pastor Christian? Well, do you recall your chemistry lessons on the table of elements? We have a college student here. Maybe she can help us. Gold is the weightiest of all these elements. They have a specific weight to them, all these elements. And gold is the heaviest, and followed by silver, and followed by brass, and followed by iron, the lightest of all these metals. All right? And then, if you look at it from the perspective of which is most precious, again, gold is the most precious metal in among these metals, elements that are mentioned. And you have silver, and then you have brass, and then you have iron, and iron mixed with clay. But then we also observe there is a smiting stone, right? Made out of the unseen hands. Unseen hands, meaning this is a supernatural thing that happens. Made out of unseen hands. And then what happens? It smashes the image into 1,000,000 pieces, into smithereens, and the explosion caused by this supernatural stone makes the colossus into a heap of a mountain. And what's the interpretation of that dramatic dream? Come back next week and find out. All right?